Yeah, well, nobody's
And as usual,
After the fact.
our treasurer is back in the back corner. If anybody's dues are due, or if you would like to make a contribution to the Historical Society High School Award, we're always taking donations for that. Every year we try to give one high school senior who demonstrates an interest in local history and the importance of studying local history, award toward their college. We can't call it a scholarship because if we call it a scholarship, the college will take the money, that much money away from any financial aid they have. So if we call it an award, they can't do it. So we're awarding them for being interested in local history. Anything else? The other thing we have, I announced at last January's meeting that Fanny Manzi had resigned from the board due to family problems and other commitments. So we have an opening on the board at that time. Vivian Tucker came up afterwards to Allison and I and volunteered to be on the board. We discussed it at our board meeting tonight, and we would like to present her name to the membership to vote on to whether or not you would like her to be on our board. So if I could have a motion.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Welcome, Vivian. March 15th meeting at 6 o'clock here. Okay? The Historical Society, well, first of all, we have our program cards. Anyone that didn't get one in the mail, they're up here, so you can take one. The Historical Society is starting a fundraiser. We have made this little ornament. It's of the Thorne Building, and with a drawing from Sally Gifford O'Brien. And on the back, it gives a history of the building, when it was built, and how the village was incorporated to accept the donation. And we'll be selling these. Anybody interested, let us know. They are, what we, $15 for it, and I'll pass it around so everybody can look at it. We only have the one right now. The other thing I wanted to announce is that there is a sign in Lithgow on Route 44 that points toward the Shun Pike. It's an old historic sign deteriorating. And we've been asked to look into it and see what we can find out and see what we can do to possibly restore it to its historic significance. And so Judith very nicely has put the sign in the paper this week, in the Millerton paper, asking for any information on the roadside mystery. So if anybody else has any information, please let us know. We're working on that. Okay, anything else that anybody else would like to? Allison, did you have?
We lost her.
Yeah, see if she's in there. I think she had something else she wanted to bring up. Oh, of the DVDs of the Millbrook that were done by Allison. You got the DVD?
Yes. I just wanted to announce that this is on sale at the bookstore. It's $15. They've been going like hotcakes since they came out in December, Christmas. All the celebrities have bought a few copies or more. But other people from out of town, it's really a lot of fun. And we're really selling them, but they're there, $15. Just wanted to know.
And the proceeds?
Oh, the proceeds
Go
come
to the archives. So,
Thank you.
What is a DVD?
What is a DVD?
No, what is it? I mean, what is it about?
Who's here who will explain it the best?
Oh,
It's the
David, you want to tell us about the,
It's basically interviews with the descendants, the Italian descendants, how they got here, where they came from in Fundi, the experiences and the dialogues, and it really pulls that history together. It's a celebration and why the community was such an important part of our history.
I kind of thought that's what it was, but she didn't say that. So, she just said the DVD's on sale. Okay.
Sorry.
I'll take 6.
anything else? Okay, everybody, we're once again welcoming Will Tatum, the Dutchess County historian, to our midst to tell us about World War I and what he's found out about it in our community. Oh, and that's the other thing I wanted to announce is I am looking into the genealogy of those who fought in World War I from the town of Washington. So if any of you have any information or any descendants or anything else, like Jonathan just told me a story about his, whom I looked up online and found a little bit, but I didn't know that he was a Quaker and didn't fight at all, but he was in ROTC and he was in Syracuse University, so he was, that's why he was on the plaque as being one of our veterans. So, anything? Just let me know, all right?
If
Go
she
ahead,
needs
Will.
to use the hook to pull me off the stage, let her know. All right, so not only do you get a little bit of World War I tonight, you get the completely unintentional comedy of me trying not to trip over all of these wires up here. So if I end up looking like Jerry Lewis, it is at least partly on purpose, maybe? We're doing a slight sound check here, not too loud. All right, can everyone hear that?
Yes.
Good, we're very concerned about everyone being able to hear, which is how we got this purchase actually through the Tavern Trail Fund, so that program is going well. My program tonight is on the Year of the Veteran in Dutchess County. That is what we are doing for 2018. It is a collaboration between county government, the Dutchess County Historical Society, and all of our local partners. So we're going to begin tonight with a full-on, amazing multimedia presentation that I had pretty much nothing to do with, because I don't know how to make videos, but thankfully Bill Jeffway of the Dutchess County Historical Society does. So we're going to begin with the overview video to discuss Year of the Veteran, and then what we're going to get into is the title of the presentation implies, is documenting the Great Wars. So how do we go about discovering the role of people, in this case from Millbrook in Washington, in World War I. But without further ado, hopefully this video will work.
Will, do you want the lights off?
Yes, I think that would be best.
Scared?
Called Great War, when many felt they had seen the closure of a war so large, so horrific it was the war
Spread that over with sound in the right place.
in recognition of the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. The Dutchess County Historical Society respectfully declares 2018 the Year of the Veteran in Dutchess County. While recognizing all veterans of all wars, we are putting a special focus on the brief moment at the end of the so-called Great War, when many felt they had seen the closure of a war so large, so horrific it was the war to end all war. We are featuring a great many of the 300 photographs we have from the Fred Close collection. In capturing county parades of farewell and welcome home across the span of 2 years, they reflect war's pomp and ceremony, its broad sacrifices, its sobering human toll, and our ability, or perhaps need, to still find humor and humanity. The donor, Fred Close, received a Purple Heart for his service in World War I. He helped found the Lafayette Post of the American Legion. He's spent 25 years as Dutchess County Sheriff and a lifetime helping veterans. He died in 1981. The photographer also served in World War I and was a fellow founder of the Lafayette American Legion Post. Reuben Van Black was a professional photographer. He was only 50 when he died in 1940. The earlier photographs of 1917 show a wide variety of men from the cities, towns, and villages of the county getting ready to go to war. And while they may be very individualistic and ragtag in advance of heading out, by the time of the September farewell parade, they were in uniform and uniformed. The parade itself featured all parts of society, including the town elders, the veterans of the Civil War, all united around a single cause to defeat the Kaiser. Women feature prominently in the care of men. Posters remind us of the young age of many who would need that care. Local Red Cross units were ready and on call. Bond drives were as much a test of loyalty and patriotism as any other means of service. You can feel the buoyant optimism and determination in the faces in the procession to the train station. And final farewells. In 1918, all of Dutchess County was very closely following the war in Europe and the impact at home. In July, 187 more men go to Europe, including Van Black. And although the end of the fighting arrives in November, much negotiating, much rebuilding remains to be done. A jubilant welcome home parade occurs in September of 1919, 2 years but many lifetimes away from the prior parade. In this never-before-published photograph, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy strides with force and confidence. In fact, of course, both the man and the nation were stepping briskly into unimaginable challenges, personal, economic, and military. And with them, those in each city, town, and village in the county. These are the stories of those men and women. Part of our work is to listen. We're seeking the stories of living veterans, working with veteran organizations, and by mobilizing with Bard College, a mobile history van to go out and gather stories, we're seeking online submissions of World War I memorabilia in line with the state and even national efforts. Part of our work is sharing. We're partnering with the FDR Library and County Fair for exhibitions which will then travel town to town across the county. Working in partnership with offices of the Dutchess County Executive and Director of the Division of Veteran Affairs, this effort aligns with state and even national activities in a way that we believe ties all these stories together on a scale and with a degree of permanence befitting the scale of the contributions of these men and women.
All right, so what do you guys think of that?
Very, very good.
So, that's the Year of the Veteran in a nutshell. It's covering, essentially 2018 is going to be the year of discovery. We will be going around partnering with local historical societies throughout the county to seek to uncover material that perhaps has been lost or misplaced over time, to record information from veterans, not of World War I, but of subsequent conflicts, particularly Korea onwards, because those veterans have not been as heavily interviewed as World War II veterans have. But no one is turned away from that program. And also building up all of this material so that we can report on it in 2019. Most folks think, of course, of November 11th, originally known as Armistice Day, because that's when the fighting itself stopped, but the war itself does not formally conclude until June of 1919, when the Treaty of Paris is signed, Treaty of Versailles actually is signed in France. So this is a war that goes into 1919, and that gives us grounds, at least, for using this year to gather material and the next year to report on it. And as part of that gathering, we will be the Dutchess County Historical Society rather, is developing a set of display banners, essentially pop-up exhibit, that will be released on April 25th at Hyde Park at the Wallace Center as part of the annual meeting of the Dutchess County Historical Society. That will then travel on to the Dutchess County Fair and then be available after the fair to travel to other venues in the county. And as well, for those of you who've ever traveled all the way out to Poughkeepsie to visit the DMV and the county office building, you may have seen on your way in or out a set of display cases. Those display cases are being made available on a month-by-month basis for historical societies, if they so desire, to rotate exhibits in and out. So there are a variety of opportunities to show off your World War I history. But tonight's presentation is really about how we go about documenting the war, how we recapture the stories of Dutchess County individuals who were involved in that war, both in terms of those who served in France and the effect and impact here on the home front. And in so doing, we're actually picking up where our direct ancestors left off. So the fellow you see here is, at the time, the state historian James Sullivan. He served from the early 20th century through the World War I era. And right after the war in 1920, he came up with the idea of creating a multi-volume work that would be exploring New York's role in the Great War on a county-by-county basis. Great idea. Paired with this was actually the legislation, the so-called Historians Law, that set up the system of municipal historians here in New York. So those two projects went hand in hand. You've got the State Assembly giving the green light to create this multi-volume work, and as part of that, they also have to de facto give a green light to have municipal historians appointed in order to do the gathering work. So, what happens? Well, we have all of this material gathered throughout the 1920s, and then has anyone seen a multi-volume work on New York in the Great War? So if you had, I'd love to speak with you, due to the fact that the State Assembly never voted the money to actually assemble and publish the work. They gave authorization to gather all of this material, but then after it was all in, they said, you know what, we're actually not going to go with that anyway. And one of the points that Bill's video speaks to, and that we are working around throughout this year, is the fact that you have World War I, you have this great celebration, this economic boom, and then within a few years you are into the Great Depression. And followed by that you have World War II. So really all of the events of World War I tend to be overshadowed by Prohibition, by women's suffrage, by economic catastrophe, and then by the Second World War. So all of these efforts to gather material are just overshadowed and lost along the way. Thankfully, however, the material itself is not, at least not totally. So if you go up to the state archives, as the Dutchess County Historical Society and I have done, you will find that there are still folders of material up there organized by municipality. And these contain all of the material, or at least some of the material, you can never say how much survives without knowing what was originally there, that was sent in by the local historians in the 20s. So we're going to go through and look at what sorts of remains of World War I are there in terms of other municipalities in Dutchess County, because not every municipality sent in the same amount of stuff. And I'm sorry to say that the town of Washington at that time was not one of the well-reported municipalities. They only sent a typewritten list of veterans from the community. But, looking here, as you can see, the town and village of Fishkill gives us an example of more complete reporting, but the reason it's up here is not to make you guys feel bad about what wasn't done 100 years ago. It's more to give you an idea of what might still be out there. And we'll get to that more directly later on in the presentation. So what do we have from the village of Fishkill? Well, first, and I apologize for it probably not turning up too well, you have a handwritten list of names, the honor roll as it is titled. And it's essentially a brief service history of every single veteran from the town or village of Fishkill. In addition to that, this file included photos of some of the veterans. So presumably the town historian went around to the various families that she knew had participated and said, can you give us this information, and is there anything that you would like to submit that can then be featured in the volume? So we have photos. Photos are great, but I'm sure as many of you have experienced yourself, how great are photos when you don't know who the photo is of? It's not as useful as it could be, but thankfully, all of the photos in this report folder have the name of the individual written on the back. And we'll give you one example of a single individual for whom this packet really provides excellent coverage. So you have the honor roll there. The name of the individual is A. Ernest Brockway. He entered on August 9th, 1918, was sent to Camp McClellan down in Virginia, joined the 36th Field Artillery. He was promoted to corporal on November 12th, 1918, so really right after armistice was signed. And then he's demobilized in March of 1919 and sent back to the United States. But not only do we have that, we have a photo of him in probably a tent at Camp McClellan. We can tell because this is a large canvas structure that has its own tin heating wood-burning stove there. And ironically, in 1917 and 1918, when troops were being sent down to the South to train, and because this is the way the government works, many New York troops were sent to places like South Carolina, Alabama, Virginia. The winter of 1917 to 18 was the coldest and snowiest in decades down south. So that tin wood-burning stove there is no joke. The men needed them very much. And so that's, and on the back we have its identification as A. Ernest Brockway. From the hamlet of Brockway, New York, which was located in the town of Fishkill. It's now a housing development, so the hamlet no longer exists. Now let's look at Eastern Dutchess, your neighbors immediately to the east. Dover went all out. They have an incredible report, and in fact, their correspondence is included in this folder. The town historian there asked for all of the material to be sent back so that Dover could do its own book. And as far as we can tell, the state historian said no. But we hope to include all of this material in 2018 and 2019 as the year of the veteran rolls forward. So the first thing we encountered was a dense stack of about 50 pages of handwritten material detailing everything that happened in Dover. So you start off with page 1, the Home Defense Corps. So in addition to sending troops to actually fight in the field, the men who stayed behind organized themselves into a paramilitary group for local defense. The next thing you have in this report, they're going around and administering an oath of allegiance. You continue to page through, you see the names of everyone who took the oath. You have Red Cross, huge organization throughout Dutchess County during this period in terms of both training nurses to help here on the home front and over in France, also gathering money and indeed making all kinds of winter wear for the soldiers. So these top two names here, the label there is cutters. These would have been the women who were cutting out cloth fabric, yardage fabric. And then below them you have knitting. So the Red Cross volunteers here in Dover were both sewing garments for soldiers to help keep them warm, but also knitting a variety of goods like hats and scarves and gloves. And then you have 5 Liberty Bond runs that were made between 1917 and 1918. These were 5 separate campaigns going out to sell war bonds that would underwrite the cost of the war. And over the course of those 5 bond drives, Dover raised $310,600 in 1917 and 1918 money, which huge amount. Dutchess County in general, from what we've seen in terms of the bond reporting, raised somewhere close to about $10 million over the course of 1917 to 1918, and these are all charitable donations. Now, of course, there is the fine print, which is the local papers would tend to publish the names of everyone who had purchased bonds. So if your name didn't end up in the paper, then members of the local home defense committee might come by to discuss with you the meaning of patriotism and the need to make these sacrifices and contributions. And then at the very end, you have the United War Work Campaign. So this was one of those unintentional ironies of history. Throughout the summer of 1918, many of the major industrial unions, groups like the YMCA, the YWCA, the ALA, that's the American Library Association, were bonding together to have a week-long campaign in November of 1918 where they would take under all sorts of fundraising activities in order to further the war effort, because the idea in the summer of 1918 is that this war is going to continue at least until 1919. And this we have actually from the Quaker Hill and Pauline Historical Society United War Work Campaign. This is part of their poster collection, and you see all of these organizations. So the YMCA, the Salvation Army, the YWCA. You also have the War Camp Community Service and the American Library Association. Librarians from throughout Dutchess County were actually going down to those training camps in the South and setting up camp libraries, and also seeking donation of books. You also have some things that may not be quite as familiar. There's the National Catholic War Council, as well as the Jewish Welfare Board. All of these were coming together for mass collaboration, for a focused campaign to raise money between November 11th and November 18th. The fighting officially ends on November 11th, 1918, hence the great unintentional irony of all of this funding effort. And then we saw how there was an honor roll made for Fishkill. Well, Dover goes out and does one better. They create a comprehensive set of service cards. If you've ever done genealogical research that touches on people in World War I, you might know that the United States government itself created official war record cards like these, and they're now housed in the New York State Archives. You can reach them online either through the New York State Archives or through Ancestry.com. But Dover did their own. They have about 75 veterans documented through these service cards. This one right here, Frank Brennan, he was a private in the 307th Infantry Regiment of the 77th Division. That is the big New York and New Jersey division. Their divisional sign was the Statue of Liberty. So if you see Statue of Liberty patches or things painted on helmets like that, that's probably the 77th Division. And he was part of the battalion, the famous Lost Battalion, that advanced so far into German lines in late October 1918 that they were cut off for 4 days before finally being able to withdraw. So as much as this was an intense conflict for many of the troops in the trenches, Frank Brennan was a veteran of one of the most intense episodes, because it was this American pocket that was being subjected to relentless bombardment by the Germans for days. Now, what does Millbrook have? Well, earlier this week, Kathy was kind enough to let me come around and poke into the collections over in Village Hall. And one of the collections we looked at that has a lot of interesting stuff in it is the Sutherland Collection. And since we have the town and village historian here, I'm going to ask David, do you have any knowledge of the deeper background of the Sutherlands? Because there wasn't a lot in the collection history.
Off the top of my head, no.
No. Ladies and gentlemen, make a note. Today is the day. Tonight is the night when I have stumped David.
The Sutherlands were very much a part of the broad community, but I don't have the details on it.
Well, that is definitely something to look into as part of the data gathering here in 2018, because there's some very interesting items in the Sutherland collection. We're going to focus on the visuals tonight because that's just the type of presentation that we have. And the first one we have is this relatively early biplane. The photograph itself has what looks like 1911 as the year and a caption in French. So this could have been an early scout plane from the immediate pre-war era. But moving forward, we suddenly have this photograph. These are all German Fokker D-7 planes, also known as the Albatross. This was pretty much the most advanced fighter that the Germans created during the war. If you go up to the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome, once they start up again this summer, they actually have a D7 in their collections that you can see. These are all stacked up, and according to a friend of mine who's an expert in the aviation history of World War I, this is probably a shot of the factory itself where these were made. That would have been the Ostdeutsche Albatros-Werke, which roughly translates to the East German Albatross Works. And when you look at the back of this, it is labeled Beaucoup German planes, which French, of course, a lot of German planes. Our next one is actually a crashed American plane. That is a Curtiss Jenny. And for those of you who are stamp collectors or have ever rubbed up against stamp collectors, you might have heard of an early stamp called the Flying Jenny. And that is, that's the plane that inspired that. It was a trainer, an observation aircraft used after the war in air postal deliveries, crop dusting, barnstorming activity. All we have on this one is the date, November the 28th, 1917. And we also have a photographer's mark down here which says that this was at least developed in San Antonio, Texas. How it comes to be in a Millbrook collection would be a very interesting thing to follow up on. Now, of all of this aircraft stuff, this is really a truly amazing piece right here. So you see a plane that's got 20 stamped on it. You have, obviously it's black and white, but if this was color, you would have the red, white, and blue. The wing is off of it. This is a plane called a SPAD 13. It was a French-designed fighter plane that was used extensively by the American Air Corps, because while we were developing our own fighters here in America, it was just cheaper and easier for us to send pilots over and be equipped with French aircraft. And you see behind it actually some albatrosses, spoils of war. Now this one, if you look closely, you might notice some similarities with this example down here. And the big one here is, written right there, is Smith 4. You also see Smith 4 here. It's the 20, it's the shooting star, which you also have the 20 and the shooting star here. You have the red, white, and blue, the S, all of the other numbers more or less match up. And it turns out that you have probably an unpublished photograph of the Smith 4 SPAD 8, which is now in the Smithsonian. So this particular one, and I'm going to refer to my cheat sheet here, is one of only 4 SPAD 13s that survive in the world. It was flown by, pardon me for a second as I find my place, Raymond Brooks SPAD 4. It was assigned to Lieutenant A. Raymond Brooks, U.S. Army Air Service, who named it after the college attended by his sweetheart, so Smith College, and future wife. It was the 4th of his airplanes, so named. So he went through Smiths 1 through 3. We don't know if they were shot down or down by mechanical failure. But he flew this as part of the 22nd Aero Squadron. He was plane number 20. After the war, Major Robert L. Walsh, who was part of General Billy Mitchell's staff. Some of you may have heard of Billy Mitchell as an early proponent of what would become the American Air Force, suggested that they send 2 SPAD 13s back to the United States to tour across the country in order to essentially raise more money for the after the war effort of dealing with all of the damage and veteran services, all of that stuff. And after that service, this SPAD was delivered into the Smithsonian's hands, where it was then restored in 1980. So, for still reasons unknown, the deep mystery of why probably the only photograph of its kind of Smith 4, because this is not a postcard, this is an actual photographic print, is in your collection, bears further examination. Now, we also have Bond stuff, which, as you saw, the neighboring town of Dover raised $310,000, almost $311,000 worth of bond sales. Now, we don't have the numbers specifically for Washington or Millbrook, but we do have a lot of stuff in your collection that relates to bonds. So this booklet here is a catalog of publications for the Second Liberty Loan of 1917. This is an example of a booklet that was common at the time, which would give you all of the options on how to order those moving posters that still survive around today. You can get all, they give you the various dimensions, the name of the poster itself. As you go through, they have prints of what these posters look like. And in your collection, you even have one. Unfortunately, it didn't come all the way to the front, but the really important one. So in the booklet, you have that poster there listed. It's a reproduction of children with flag poster size 20 inches by 30 inches. So when you bought bonds, you then had the option to buy one of these posters as well to show that you would purchase bond. Well, it just so happens that in a lovely exhibit case down in Village Hall, you have that very poster. So clear evidence that Millbrook and Washington were very much involved in the bond drive. Now, the Farm Cadet program. Has anyone heard of the Farm Cadets?
No.
So has anyone heard of the Women's Land Army?
Yes.
So the Women's Land Army, is that a British thing or an American thing?
British.
It's actually both. It's better known in Britain, but they do actually, or they had a Women's Land Army presence here in Millbrook. And there's more detail on that down in the archives. But more impressively, here in America, we had the Farm Cadet program. The purpose of the Farm Cadet program was essentially to free up labor. So if you have all of these soldiers who are going abroad to fight in France, but you don't really have mechanized agriculture, what do you do about making sure that you've got enough labor left to till the fields? Well, in the summers of 1917 and 1918, school children had the opportunity to go work at local farms for school credit. The catch being, at the end of the year, at the end of the summer season, you had to turn in a written report to your principal, who would then send that up to state education, which has thankfully preserved these for us now. So these are up in the state archives. Now, you might see the town there, Skenevis. You may be thinking, wow, where is Skenevis in Dutchess County? Well, it isn't in Dutchess County. It's actually in Otsego County, down along Interstate 88. But the reason that I bring up this report, this is from a young woman, Mildred E. Clark, and she goes on for quite some time. That's her first page of her 6-page report, which I will read to you in painful detail. No, I'm going to skip over that. But she does really lay it all out for you. So whenever possible, I believe in letting you hear the voices of the past. So this is what Mildred Clark says in the opening portion of her essay titled The Farm Cadet. The American Farm Cadet is the newest patriotic institution affecting the younger people of our land. They answered quickly the call for more food production, and by their services have given our older boys a chance to go across to fight for democracy. Too often we hear protests from a certain class of people that it is not possible to expect more crops and food when our helpers have all gone to war. In answer to this, our boys and girls of high school age have volunteered to go out on farms to work, to do anything and everything they can to make the war a success. And then she goes on, in the following pages, to describe her experience on her father's farm, dealing with chickens, runaway cows, a particularly vicious stray cat who ends up eating all of her kittens. It gets pretty gruesome at times, but apparently that's farm life. I wouldn't know, I'm not a farmer.
Oh, she does.
But she ends here, and again, this says a lot. My summer on the farm, I think, has helped to produce more food for our boys over there and for our people over here. It has helped me to know that people are working and everywhere doing their best to help Uncle Sam win the war. And that is a young woman's voice, of course, in a period in time when women were not given a lot of opportunities to assist with the really heavy farm work or otherwise prove themselves. So this was a major part of the opportunity that we hear more of from World War II, of women joining the workforce. Now, Farm Cadet Program, what does it say for Washington and Millbrook? Is this also a blank folder? Thankfully it's not. So you have, this is the cover page that lists all of the farm cadets who sent in reports, and we've checked the folder, and thankfully all of the reports are actually there. You have Graydon Birch, Frank Cornelius, Charles Dean, James DeFazio, Gano Guernsey, Paul Haight, Francis Hillick, Otto Royla, that's German, so I don't know how it's pronounced here in Washington. Rule, and then John Simmons. Some actually pretty decent reports in there, which if anyone wants to read them, let me know and I'll be glad to send those images along. I took cell phone shots of them. We're going to be looking at Charles Dean's report as an example of all of these. Charles Dean did not write 6 pages, somewhat thankfully. He wrote 2 very good pages, and I am going to read this one in its entirety because I think that it will be of interest to all of you. He begins, I've been employed on the farm of Harry A. Russell during the summer months from April to September. I worked 9 hours a day. Most of the time I did general farm work, but I spent some time working in the garden. I missed 1 day in June due to out-of-town business. So April to September, 9 hours a day, probably 7 days a week. During the early part of the summer, I helped in planting corn, potatoes, and oats. Later, I hoed between the plants of corn and potatoes, while the horses cultivated between the rows with the cultivator. I helped to harvest the hay, of which the season's crop was of 2 months' worth. After the potato duffer dug the potatoes, I gathered them up and carried them to the cellar where they will be sorted later. In the garden, I planted seeds of all the garden vegetables and kept the garden in good cultivation during the growing period. And here's the big takeaway. This farm work was of great value to me and also to the country. The work of agriculture I received in school, I put in practice on the farm. Also, the experiences I had on the farm will be a preparatory step in my later life. My work was of value to the country, for I took the place of an older man who had been called into service. The farm is an excellent place for boys where they may secure pure air and live near to nature. And also farm work is excellent for building up one's physical condition. So a very evocative voice from Millbrook and Washington's past. And of course, one of the things that I found particularly interesting was his statement about the work of agriculture I received in school. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how the curriculum has changed over time. There used to be things like home ec and apparently home agriculture as well that have since faded, but at least in Charles Dean's case, he was able to put those school lessons into practical effect. And of course, the connection between children and patriotism through these reports is very palpable. So, the whole point of all of this is that in the 1920s, efforts were made to collect this information. We know from those records that were turned in by other towns that there was a lot of material out there in the 20s. We know from the material that's currently in the Millbrook Historical Society's hands that at least some of it survived. But we also know that probably there are more survivals, and those survivals will tend to be in private hands. So I know David recognizes this picture, and all of the rest of you who, like myself, enjoy the annual calendars should as well. Which year's calendar was this from, David?
They all fade together.
All of them. So this is actually a photocopy of a photograph that is currently in private hands. But this is a collection of Millbrook's veterans here. And we also have from the, which collection is this, Kathy?
That's from Jack Dean's.
So this is from the Dean collection.
Yeah.
Another photograph of one of his ancestors who was the youngest chaplain in World War I, but you'll notice that's also a photocopy. And before the days of computers, and scanning equipment, and cell phones that can take a better picture than an SLR camera, that was essentially how families were able to retain copies of the originals, but also make sure that some version of that information would be preserved in an archival institution. Well, as part of this data gathering in 2018 and on to 2019, and really as long as anyone wants to give us stuff to look at, My office in the Dutchess County Historical Society will be working to make opportunities for families who have material from the Great War and really from any conflict in our history, to have us come in and scan it, to photograph it, to generate a digital record that is essentially a digital surrogate. It's a computer version of these photographs and other materials so that they can be preserved. In the Millbrook Historical Society, also on the Dutchess County Historical Society's website. This is a view of their page discussing all of the things related to the Year of the Veteran, those Van Black photos that we saw in the video, the traveling exhibit that's coming together. They're going to have a list of exhibitions by municipality and also the Veterans Oral History Program. But this one here, if you were to click on it, you'd be taken to this page. It's organized by municipality, and I will tell them that Millbrook needs to be added to Washington under the list. But this will be a place where, if you deem it acceptable to grant permission, that digital material can be displayed. Not just stuff that is gathered in the campaign of 2018 and 2019, but also stuff that you may already have in the Millbrook Historical Society's records. So it's essentially this, we are continuing the work of the 1920s, but we are continuing it using modern technology, where we can create these digital surrogates so that the original material can stay in the family's hands, but at the same time, copies are available both for emergency backup and for greater use. So that's the presentation. Just to emphasize the greater use aspect of that, we've already spoken to some families in Rhinebeck who brought material into the image and told us that they wished we had been around 3 months earlier because a house fire had taken out about a half of the family archive. So that's another reason why this service is being offered, because you have these photographs that may be one of a kind, you have objects which can be photographed for preservation purposes, and all it takes is one malfunctioning furnace to bring it all apart.
Or a natural disaster.
Or natural disaster.
And earthquakes and everything is...
And floods,
And
and lightning
and
strikes,
hurricanes.
everything you can imagine. So that is documenting the Great War. We have a nice general platform to begin with in our gathering operations, but there's a lot of work to be done here in 2018 and into 2019. And if any of you have family members that you know might have some World War I material poking around up in the attic, or you remember that bundle of stuff that's in the laundry room that you've been meaning to go through for years but never really got to it, now would be a great time to do that. And again, we aren't asking you to necessarily give up your family treasures to a local repository, but rather to consider the opportunity to have all of that material scanned or photographed so that it exists in a form that isn't as easily destroyed in a natural disaster. So with that, are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I noted in the video presentation that there were a lot of African-American faces.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a separate African-American division or regiment or something from Dutchess County? I know that it was not until World War II, or after World War II, Harry Truman integrated the military.
That's correct. So the question is, there were a lot of African-American faces in the video. What was the role and the experience of African-American troops in World War I? Because our Army was not officially integrated until 1948 under President Truman. The answer to that is there was a Hudson Valley African-American Infantry Regiment. That's the 369th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters. They were recruited from Dutchess, from Orange, from Ulster, Westchester, Rockland, and they were part of the 98th Infantry Division. Kind of a sad story, and one that we will be plugging into more as we move forward with this campaign, but the 98th Infantry Division, when it arrived in France, it was expecting to fight alongside all of the other Army divisions, and in this way, looking at some of the work that's been done by other historians, there was an expectation among the African-American soldiers that by fighting on the Western Front, they could earn improved citizenship and recognition at home. And they knew on their way over that General Pershing, the overall commander of the American Expeditionary Force, had been working hard to keep all of the American divisions together. The last thing he wanted was for the American Army to essentially become a replacement service where one division goes off to one French Army group and another division goes to a British Army group. When the 98th Division arrived, which was all African American, he gave them over to the French immediately without a qualm. Said, you guys have been wanting American divisions, here's one you can have. The French Army, of course, was not integrated in the modern sense, but they had a very well-developed colonial army, particularly containing divisions of Senegalese troops from their colonies in Africa. So what ended up happening is that the 98th Division and the 369th Regiment fought with the French Army. They used generally French equipment. They were known as the Blue Helmets because they received blue-painted French helmets, distinguished themselves numerous times, won acclaim and recognition from the French, came back to status quo antebellum in the United States. And we also know that some elements of that regiment and other African American units, like artillery units, trained here in Dutchess County at Camp Whitman, which is now Greenhaven Correctional Facility. And we have a few stories that are already coming out of that area that we'll be developing, and we are in fact looking for a professional scholar to write an article for the Dutchess County Historical Society yearbook to take this material that we are generating and put it in a respectful and penetrating analysis. And some of those photos that you saw with African Americans in them from the recruiting drives in Poughkeepsie, the segregation went to the point where the white recruits and the African American recruits had separate parades. So that parade in September of 1917, where the Civil War veterans were in there and the Red Crosses from each of the communities were in there, the African American recruits were not permitted to take part in that parade. They had parades of their own down to the train station with significantly less fanfare throughout the course of the war. So this is far from a triumphal story that we're looking at and recovering and documenting the Great War, but it is a story that needs to be told. Any other questions? All right, well,
The records that you have there from all the individual towns, are they online?
they are now. They are online through the Dutchess County Historical Society's website. Good to see you, Tom.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Earlier you mentioned a two-volume set of books about World War I. This book here I bought probably 35 years ago at Carousel on Route 82
In Sangerville, yeah?
Yes.
for $5. And it was under a pile of other dusty, dirty books, and I think it's getting ready to get deep six. But this is the title is U.S. Official Pictures of the World War, showing America's participation. And it's been abused to a certain extent. I think somebody was gonna dispose of it, but I saved it. And I've spent hours. And now I have two, there's no index, but it gives all the details and a lot of pictures of the big shots and General Pershing and all that. It's a treasure that I don't know what to do with.
Well, thankfully, the Millbrook Historical Society is here because they have an infinite amount of storage space. But no, there were many beautiful volumes created after the war. Unfortunately, the multi-volume work, which, if you think about it, could easily have almost been a volume per county, was never generated. We are hoping, however, to generate a book-length project out of all of this collecting that would be a 2019 product. But we don't want to promise too much with that because books can be a very complicated thing to pull together, as you know. Are there any other questions? All right, I'll turn things over to you. Thank you, Diana. Thank you all for having me.
There are about 140 names on the website for the town of Washington that served in World War I. Some of them are difficult to read and to scan, but that's look up genealogies. And there's refreshments, and please come again in a month, March 15th. Oh, yeah.
You're gonna put out a request for postcards?
Oh, yes, postcards. You wanna?
Oh,
You.
me? Yeah. No, I'm looking for vintage postcards of tribute garden. We have very few in the archives, and if you know people, I've already got some volunteers who may have them, but if you have,
Jim, you
I'm
want to
looking for
use the
the.
microphone?
Come up here and use the mic, they can't
I
hear
thought I
you.
talked loud.
No,
Not loud enough.
no, loud enough.
All right, you're live.
Yo. No, I'm looking for postcards, vintage postcards. They were printed by, I believe, originally, was it Allen's Pharmacy back in like the early 1900s. And I'm looking for vintage ones of tribute gardens inside, not the outside.
Okay.
So if anybody has them, my name is Jim, I'm with the Historical Society, Millbrook, and I would certainly appreciate this. That's it.
And Diane also mentioned the floor,
The what?
mopping the floor,
Oh,
looking for volunteers.
we're looking for volunteers to help clean up after the Historical Society meeting. We'll have to put the chairs back and everything else. Somebody to mop the floor and so that it's clean for the nursery school the next morning. So if anybody's interested, please just hang around till those chairs are all picked up and then you can do that. Thank you. Anything else?
I mentioned
Oh, you
this.
want to talk about that, Jane?
Can I?
Sure.
I mean, he's just talking about this. I don't know if he's known about this. This is a product that I've been praying that existed, and I just finally got it. And it's called Flip Pal. And what it is you flip it up here, you put a 4x6 picture in here, you close it, you push that green button, it goes on an SD card, and then goes into your computer, and then you can have your loved one tell the story that goes with the picture. This is my father, John Kading, and you know all his pictures, and this daughter has stayed up many times waking. How was I going to get his stories onto the pictures? This is it. Also, you can take off the top, and you can actually do big pictures, maps, quilts, whatever you want, and it stitches it together. So, and then you can always take the SD card out. This one is wireless, it doesn't even have to come out again, it goes right to my computer. Or you can get the one that just is not wireless, comes out of there, goes into your computer. So if I can save anyone, 3 months ago, that Rhinebeck, if they had something like this, there's no excuse. And what I have been looking for is I want my Aunt Helen, because my Aunt Helen's got lots and lots of scrapbooks of every newspaper article that my father, everybody was in, and then her pictures, and you do not need to take them out of terrible,
The black paper.
yes, that's
photo
the
albums.
tape, the things are stick, and you ruin them. This goes right over it, and you don't have to do that. And the magnetic photo albums, unfortunately, the Corner News sold so many to so many people, it is destroying your pictures. It is literally disintegrating your pictures. This, you just put over the magnetic page, one after another.
All for the lower price of.
This, without the wireless, is $149, okay? $189 with the wireless card. If you go to my website, I have honored my father and mother with the website millbrookmemories.com. Real easy for everybody to remember. There is a link on the side called Flip Pal. And what you do is, I'm an affiliate marker for this, I get a percentage of any sales for this. If you do click on it, or have someone, if you're not online, you have someone else to click on it, eventually what other monies come from all my affiliate marketings from the website will be going in honor of the Kading family to the Thorne Building. whatever that may look like in the later years, this would actually be my honor to do that for my day. So, if any questions, it's called Flip Pal, it's on the side of my blog, and just click on it and you can go from there. But it is exciting. Do you ever see anything like this?
No, I tend to use the standard flatbed scan.
Yeah, but guess what? This thing, you can actually do metals. You can't do that on a flatbed scanner. So this is like totally like you can put those medals of the war and stuff that you can't do anywhere else. So I was just amazed. But when you see the videos, you know, of this and what people are doing, it's just amazing. Just amazing. But anyways, everybody needs to save their pictures.
All right,
Anybody wants
card?
Oh, Daddy's got the cards, anybody?
Oh, I have one.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you again March 15th.
And the state historian is going to be here on March 15th, so tell all of your friends, fill the room, make Dutchess County look really good.